Welcome everyone to Three Count Commentaries. This is where we talk about something other than wrestling, and I think the audio should be good now. I switched to my usual setup so that things will sound like usual. I was trying to get fancy with it, and it didn't work out. So I guess we just want to do it the old-fashioned way, you know. Trying to get fancy with it, and it didn't work out. So I guess we just want to do it. Okay, so what I was saying, I came across an article by a writer Substack by the name of Semmelweis. So Semmelweis, I don't know anything about this guy, which is good because I got to contend with the arguments and continue with what he's saying, and not worry about what he looks like. Typically, Germanic names that end in Y's, using words like Kulturkampf, usually is kind of a jumps out. And then I also came to this article because a white supremacist racist had retweeted it and was talking about how terrible rap is and how terrible hip hop is and all this stuff. And because I'm entertained by and intellectually curious, I decided to read this article, and I have to say it's actually not nearly as bad as I thought it would be. Considering all of the people who retweeted it and thought that this was some kind of anti-hip hop screed. It just kind of points out some things that would be interesting. And then he wrote two articles on hip hop that I thought were very interesting. I'm going to read both of them, depending on how long it takes me to get through this one. But this first one is called Hip Hop as Anti-White Kulturkampf: How Rap Music Changed America and the World. So I am very interested in this. I took notes on it. I was so interested. I'm probably gonna. It's pretty long. It's an extremely long piece. I'm gonna skip through it, but I'm gonna try to get to the main points. And the main point of this article, if there is a main point, is that hip hop, like all musical forms, are used by blacks to attack white people and in their ongoing battle with white America. And it sounds ridiculous on its face. And to be quite honest, it's not that serious. But he makes a solid argument. So let's go through some of this and get into some of the details that I want to talk about. First, he acknowledges hip hop as a culture, and which shouldn't be too much of a surprise. But here's what he wrote that I found to be incredibly interesting. Hip hop attaches itself to a host culture and changes that culture to accommodate itself. It does not change. It slowly makes the host culture change. Witness a remarkable uniformity of global hip hop music and fashion. Wherever it is found, one sees the same clothing styles, the same values, the same attitudes, the same body language, and of course, the same music. Here's the interesting bit: is that this is incorrect. In a other article he wrote and said he doesn't know enough about hip hop, but this is where I kind of was like, okay, what is he talking about? Because we know that in the America, and those of us who are in the culture, we know that hip hop is largely regional, and it differs between the regions. Hip hop does not have a uniformity in terms of clothing, attitude, body language, slang. Almost none of that stuff is the same. Now, it's becoming more universal as time goes on due to globalization of music. So back when there were regional sounds, there were certain things that were similar, but it was largely different. So the idea that hip hop is the same, what you see outside of the United States, what he's talking about here is from America to Brazil to France to Eastern Europe to China and Japan, only the language being wrapped in is different. So he's talking about uniformity. What you see in like other cultures in like Japan or France or Britain or whatever is people mimicking their favorite rappers in the United States. It is not it's not because of hip hop. Well, it is because of hip hop because that's the genre that they're mimicking. But it's not because hip hop decides that people have to dress this way. It's that the style of the people that they're imitating, they also imitate their style of dress. So when certain rappers are imitating other rappers, they typically dress like them, or when one culture is very close with another, they share um, a culture trade. So there'll be loan words back and forth. There'll be manners of dress back and forth. This is how a lot of New York is anyway. New York is a big old melting pot where the blacks and the Jews and the Hispanics, they all kind of dress the same. They all kind of talk the same, have the same accent, that sort of thing. Where outside they look different, but with slight variations, they're essentially the same people because they share the same environment. Hip hop is sort of the same thing. It has a lot of the similarities because things are going to be similar because it's a genre of music. As a genre of music, as any genre of music, is going to have similarity, like all jazz music is similar. All right. That's like all rock music is somewhat similar. There is going to be some level of similarity. Now, when it comes to dress, dance, etc., that's a lot of that is imitation. So when you get a lot of imitation, there's going to be some uh, some issues, but it's not that hip hop is the same everywhere. It's just some issues, but it's not that hip hop is the same everywhere. It is literally regional. He doesn't know enough about hip hop to know that, but hip hop is regional. So he says, continuing, the creation of new musical forms such as the blues, jazz, rock and roll, and hip hop, and a cultural scene and ethos built around them, have been Black America's strongest rhetorical weapons in their ongoing argument or battle with white America. The influence of Black intellectuals like Booker T. Washington or W.B. Du Bois, or their modern descendants like Henry Louis Gates and Cornel West, trained in white schools and essentially speaking the conceptual language of white culture, have always been rather minimal. They are applauded by white liberal book readers, perhaps influence a few politicians, but they have no impact on culture. I think he is largely correct in that assertion. I think in that argument, he is largely correct. I wouldn't put Booker T. Washington in the same category with Henry Louis Gates and Cornel West, but okay, you know, sure. But to say that they have no really impact on the culture, it's true to a degree. You know, I think Booker T. Washington had a significant impact on the culture through the creation of schools and the creation of programs, especially in the Deep South. I think that he had a different impact, than Henry Louis Gates, I'm sorry, and Cornel West, who were just basically academics, and W.B. Du Bois, who's basically an academic. So I think that these guys definitely had, Booker T. Washington had more cultural influence. He continues by saying, but art, and especially popular music, can take ideas and energies and translate them, transmute them into a new form with mass appeal and mass influence. The abolitionist movement wasn't catalyzed by a speech or an essay, but by the novel Uncle Tom's Cabin. The civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s would have not succeeded without rock and roll, which was the first cultural phenomenon to draw large mixed audiences who came to see a mix of stars who were both black and white. And I think that makes a good point here too. Uncle Tom's Cabin was a novel that was written by, I believe, a white woman, um, and it typified the abolitionist movement. Now, here's the thing: the abolitionist movement already existed. Now, this made it sort of cross cultural, which is what he's saying in terms of mass influence and mass appeal. That's why he makes a solid argument there. And the same thing, even though the music of rock and roll wasn't always expressly political, it was the idea that people wanted to integrate and wanted to mix because they liked the music. But you could just say that that's music in general. The blues often had a mixed audience. Jazz, of course, largely had a mixed audience. And you will often see blacks and whites and all of them commiserating together in those cultures when they were allowed to. So he makes a really good argument. So he says, when Andrew Breitbart, oh boy, said the politics is downstream from culture, he was simply rephrasing what the Italian communist Antonio Gramsci had realized 100 years before. He says, but whereas Gramsci theorized a long march through the institutions, and his followers then put in practice by systematically infiltrating and taking over Western academia, the real power has lain in what Theodore Adorno called the culture industry. So then he says, in the 20th century, it has been the audiovisual arts that have influenced culture and in turn politics more than anything else. In this ongoing culture war, hip hop has been one of the primary weapons against white and Western culture ever since its ascendancy at the very end of the 20th century. What Jonathan Bowden said of Islam, that it represents a large banner under which made desperate peoples can rally together against the West, is truly double of hip hop, which requires no proclamation of religious faith and which prizes hipness over piety. I think he makes a solid argument here too. The idea that, music videos and using rap music in videos, it makes, it does have a lot of, hip hop memes, a lot of cultural memes and stuff like this. Okay. I see how he could, how he can think what he's thinking. I'm not against him so far. The issue here is he says that these groups are rallying against the West. It becomes a bit questionable when you get there. But I do absolutely agree that he says that unlike Islam, which of course proclamates uh, religious faith, hip hop prizes hipness over piety. I do believe that because hip hop is a culture of cool. It is not a culture of modesty. It is not a culture of restraint. It is not that. But here's what I do like that he says. He says hip hop is not limited or reducible to a mere political discourse, nor even to a form of music. Nevertheless, it can be and has been used as a vehicle to spread political ideas and has proven to be one of the most effective instruments of mass political rhetoric to emerge in the last 100 years. And then he goes to actually prove this, which I genuinely, what made me soften on this article, I was like, wait a second, that's a really good point. And then he says this quote, ideas which 30 years ago were limited to the fringe discourses of Black nationalism and Afrocentrism, including an entire revisionist history of human life and civilization, have moved to the mainstream of social discourse, and hip hop has been the primary vehicle that have brought them there. Skipping forward, he says, um, it is hip hop that has spread the messages and worldviews of the Nation of Islam, the Five Percenters, and other Black militant groups, which can variously be labeled extremists, Black supremacists, or just anti white. And I really hadn't thought about that until he wrote it. Like, I've been listening to Five Percenters and people from the Nation of Islam and rap music for decades. Absolutely decades. And a lot of that stuff we had no real, like, for instance, I live in Detroit, right? The Nation of Islam was born here in the city, so it's a little bit different for me. But some people may have never heard of the Nation of Islam before Muhammad Ali in the 60s, let's say. And maybe you grew up in the 80s. Ali still had some level of cultural relevance, but had long faded until you started seeing rappers take up the Nation of Islam and Louis Farrakhan become integrated into the hip hop culture as sort of a mediator amongst a lot of young blacks. Some people may have never had too many interactions with the Nation of Islam. Now, the 5% nation, the Nation of Gods and Earths, I didn't know they existed before I listened to Wu-Tang. So you can say these ideas have largely been spread through hip hop music. And there is a lot of what was traditionally fringe black nationalist material that is now popular. And largely because hip hop has brought it to people, brought it to the forefront. Now, I will say a lot of this stuff is still quite fringe. There's still only a few members of the Nation of Islam. Most people don't know any people from the Nation of Islam, don't know any black Muslims. Most black people don't know any black people who are part of the 5% nation or the Nation of Gods and Earths. But most black people have no connection to the Black Panther Party, don't know anything about the Black Panther Party. I mean, you just because you listen to uh, a lot of rappers who imitate that style, that speech, that mentality, that doesn't mean that you had any real connection to them. A lot of these groups and these ideas were founded in the 50s and 60s and had long faded by the time my generation had come along. And then when my generation came along, we mostly got introduced to it through the music, through hip hop, and that was pretty much it. And then, of course, you would have movies. Like the movies would have the woke brother in it, who would be a member of the Nation of Islam. He'll be a black Muslim, but he usually be like a token. It's basically like one guy in the whole movie, right? So, like, I get it. I understand where he's coming from. That books have been written for ages. Somebody like Frances Cress Welsing, she had written articles in the 60s and basically got kicked out of the universities for some of the stuff that she was talking about. But her ideas became very popular to a small sect of people who were then became connected to the music business. And you started seeing a lot of stuff that was saying in the ISIS papers pop up in rap songs. It was the same thing, of course, largely with the Nation of Islam, which I think is probably the most which message is pushed the most through rap music in terms of black militants or black extremists. You want to put those words out there. I think it is the Nation of Islam, if you want to be honest. So he talks about how Nation of Islam calls white people a race of devils. And he says 100 years ago, no one would claim that European peoples have no identity or culture of their own, or that they stole all their achievements from Africa or other non-white cultures, that they are, as the Nation of Islam states, a race of devils. Yet today, this is an increasingly prominent view in the public mind, especially among young people, thanks in no small part to the spread of hip-hop music and culture, which has influenced and substantially changed the discourse in academia and mainstream media. Okay, I agree with this largely, that hip-hop has become a vehicle of misinformation, but you have to realize a lot of these people who are reading these things and they're just repeating what they read. What would be the plan to sort of stop that? It's sort of an anti-free speech argument, right? Like, you're gonna need a fact checker for a rap album. Some guy writes some lyric in a rap album, you're gonna fact check it. There's not much we could do in terms of musical expression, but you do have to ask the question, why is it allowed for it to be so anti-white? And we know what happens if it's anti-Jewish, right? So when we argue that we can't prevent what's being said from being said, but we can prevent what's being said from being said because we saw what happened to Professor Greff when he started talking about them Jews. I think he makes a solid argument. And then also knowing that hip hop is now taught in the universities, people like Lupe Fiasco. Now, teach, Ninth Wonder and so many others, are operating as professors in the universities. He says you can point to left-wing teachers who spread these ideas in classrooms, but I guarantee you those teachers first learned them in part from rap music. I won't say that. I won't say that. Because a lot of those academics, because of the loosening of the standards of the universities, a lot of those professors have probably read all of these extremist papers and probably already believe a lot of the same stuff that the rappers are saying. In fact, they often validate the rappers. This is where you get guys like Cornel West and guys like Michael Larry Dyson, who for years were validating hip hop culture. And they did so by adding a certain level of intellectual weight to what was being said in hip hop culture. Now, I just put this book back, and I really shouldn't have, but it was called Born to Use Mics. It was Michael Eric Dyson and a collection of essays surrounding Nas's album Illmatic. And in that book, he is at they because it's not just Michael Eric Dyson, but him and his cohorts, who are other Black professors, are pulling all of their socialist, globalist thoughts and ideas and leading them to push forward hip hop as an idea of high intellectual cultural relevance. All right. I want to give you some examples. I need to get that book. Let me get that book. Where's that book? All right. Let's pause on this subject real quick. Let's go to all right, this guy's name is Sohail Dalatsai, and he's going to write about what track is this? New York State of Mind. So each song from Illmatic basically has its own essay. Okay, so this is what we get when we talk about the Black intellectual elites pushing forth so many of these terrible ideas and using hip hop to do it. So I'm going to read a little bit from Born to Use Mics. Again, this is from Sohail Dalatsai. My vision is terrible. It says, Illmatic was released right around the time the civil war in Afghanistan began, and Iraq was still under the jackboots of the American henchmen, as the violence of the sanctions placed on Iraq began to take their toll. This has nothing to do with Illmatic, right? Like, Nas did not rap about Afghanistan or Iraq, okay? This is some academic who is broadening the cultural view and scooping that into the album. He continues by saying, to me, his brilliance was also a commentary on the American proxy war in the post-Vietnam era, where brown cops like Saddam and the Saudi royals policed the ghettos of the third world for their Yankee masters. The capo regimes claiming countries as corners for their American dons, because as Nas says in New York State of Mind, crews without guns are goners. So basically you see a lot of these people are taking these ideas and they're expounding upon them. And you have seen quite a few things. So here's another one from Sohail Dalatsai. He says, the implications of this have been profound because America has viewed this kind of mandate to justify American expansion and supremacy in world affairs. But it also springs from something more deeply rooted within the national psyche, because from its very beginning, America has seen itself as an expansionist power with manifest destiny to its mantra, and violence is redeemer. What stood between the fulfillment of divinely ordained belief of manifest destiny and violence necessary to make it happen was the frontier, a powerful trope in American history that divided white civilization from native savagery. Out of this idea, the frontier sprang the very genesis of the idea of America, that through the establishment of civilization, a distinctly American identity would emerge that was about strength, rugged individuality, and a so-called democratic spirit. Again, none of this has anything to do with Nas. All right, none of this has anything to do with Nas. Nas did not say anything about any of this stuff. This is an academic writing in, what year was this book published? This book was published in 2010. Okay. Okay. So they're rereading this in this way. This is what postmodernism does, right? It dilutes what he's really saying and saying this is what it means to me. I'm trying to find. It was one. I think this might be it. Hip hop itself emerged from these geographies of violence, where the third world meets the first, the mashup of jam rock and planet rock. And Nas's New York State of Mind vividly captures what has taken shape since. Because in bridging the gap and embodying the street swagger of Cool G Rap and the metaphysics of Rakim and the revolutionary lumpen philosophies of Ice Cube, Nas's and New York State of Mind in many ways unify the desperate threads of urban rebellion that were conflagrating from hip-hop street corner ciphers. That state of mind, as much as in New York, also spoke to the blues wails echoing in South Central LA, South Side Chicago, and Houston's Fifth Ward, not to mention the Casbah of Algiers. So they're taking this, what Nas is talking about from New York, and basically taking it and expanding upon it and turning it into some kind of third world argument. Again, this is not what teachers are getting from hip hop. This is what they're reading into it. You know, Nas was 19 years old when he wrote Illmatic. He was just writing his experiences. What these people are doing, these professors, are taking what a 19-year-old Nas wrote and tying it into their personal politics. And this book is full of stuff like that. You know, I mean, he's talking about NAFTA and a bunch of other shit that got nothing to do with what Nas was talking about. He continues and talking about Soul Hell Dolitsai. He says, hip hop's official story has been, and official is in quotations, that it's a product of the post-industrial condition. The movement of industry and capital away from urban centers across America's borders, a process that devastated urban communities in the United States. When combined with white flight, political scapegoating, and repression, created these grimy conditions and pockets of poverty that birthed this thing called hip hop. All this is true, but this quote unquote official history on hip hop usually ends there. Where does the capital go? Why there? And what impact does it have on those places? Then it starts talking about, again, being globalist. From Detroit to New York to LA to Kingston, Lagos, and New Delhi. All these places that Nas is not talking about. You know? Like, he's not talking about any of this stuff. You listen to that song, you're not going to hear about any of this shit. Right? So, it's not that hip-hop is teaching people these foul ideas. A lot of these foul ideas are being backed up by academics. It's the academics that are doing this. And part of it, and the reason is, nobody expects historical accuracy from a rap album. Nobody's expecting solid philosophy or solid financial advice from a rap album. What they do expect it from professors in universities. But when the professors in the universities are the ones validating the misinformation on the rap album because they want to be seen as being cool. Mark Lamont Hill is featured in this fucking book too, by the way. And he's still around doing the exact same thing today as he was doing 15 years ago. This was 15 years ago that they wrote this book about this album. And the album was what, 20 years old? It's 30 years old now, I think. This, back to what Semmelweis wrote, no, it is not the left-wing teachers. I mean, that are learning these things from hip-hop. A lot of these rappers learn this stuff from left-wing teachers. It was a lot of left-wing socialist professors, activists, people like Dick Gregory, people like Angela Davis, that largely have fed this hip-hop machine more leftist politics. Again, a lot of these people, Tupac was one of them, the number one, grew up with a Black Panther in the household. Of course he's going to believe a lot of ridiculous shit. He grew up with a Black Panther in his house. He grew up under two Black Panthers. Well, one of them ended up like in a Black Liberation Army or something like that. His stepfather. Both were crackheads too, by the way. But when these people are your mentors, and these people are the ones who educate you, what are you going to think? You're going to think what they want you to think. So, and the same can be said about the Nation of Islam. When they are the people who don't forsake you when you go to jail, they're the people who embrace you and try to help you change. When those are the people who are looking after you, then of course you're going to embrace what they're teaching. You don't have no discernment in desperation. When you're desperate, your discernment goes out of the window. And a lot of these people grew up in really desperate times. Like a lot of the whole Nation of Gods and Earths and all that kind of stuff was all about self-esteem. It was all about Black people who saw Christianity as the white man's religion, because a lot of the people grew up with that. That's the white man's religion. Then what kind of religion is the Black man? Islam. That's the Arab's man religion, but they told you the Asiatic Black man is God. You forget that Asiatic part. The Black man is God. So for their own ego, they adopted that. So even though they were in the projects and they had no money, they at least had what they call knowledge of self, which means that they had a belief and an understanding that they were meant for something better, that they were grand creators and all this kind of stuff. And this is things that they learned, picked up in jail, picked up in school, or from quote unquote forbidden books that they didn't really have access to. And Black people have a real problem with the old secret history, forbidden legacy, all that kind of crap. They have it bad for that. If you can wrap anything up in forbidden history in terms of Black people, and they'll believe it. Okay. So back to the article, what Semmelweis said. He says, to listen to political rappers like KRS-One, Public Enemy, Wu-Tang, Poor Righteous Teachers, that's a deep cut, and others, is to be gradually immersed in a worldview which is collectively constructed. That's an interesting word, collectively constructed. Like the blues before it, certain phrases and tropes are repeated again and again in rap lyrics and are woven together, not by one person or group, but by the whole tradition itself, into a cohesive narrative. To hear these griots, and he puts that in quotations, tells the story Black people in Africa had a great civilization of peace and plenty, which was destroyed by European invasion and enslavement and colonization. After that, 400 years, put that in quotations, of nothing but oppression and mistreatment, continuing up to this very day. The white police officer is a descendant of the whip-bearing overseer of the plantation, and the entire American political, economic, and social system is designed to keep black non-white people poor and oppressed. Thus, blacks are both naturally superior and unfortunate victims to be pitied. He fucking nailed it here. This is what you grow up with when you get caught up in this woke bullshit. You start thinking that Frances Cress Welsing, she did a sit-down interview with somebody, and she was talking about the whites being jealous of black people's of being black people's melanin levels. They're upset about melanin levels or something. Like black people are X-Men, like they have superpowers. Melanin doesn't mean shit. This is where you get about is your third eye open? All this other all this mumbo jumbo that a lot of woke black people believe. That stuff was indeed fringe. And part of it can be blamed on hip hop, but only part of it. Because there's large cultural movements that took place before hip hop was created that brought some of this stuff to the forefront. Again, the Nation of Islam predates hip hop. The Nation of Gods and Earths probably runs concurrently with hip hop. Okay? I think the Nation of Gods and Earths was created in the 70s, I think. So, or the late 60s, one or the other. I'm pretty sure the Nation of Islam existed in the 50s. Well, of course it did, because, Malcolm X. But I'm talking about early 50s. What we're talking about here is this cohesive grand narrative that Samuel Wise is talking about that exists in hip hop, that KRS-One and Public Enemy and the Wu-Tang Clan and all of them preach. They learned it from somewhere. Okay? Now, in 2025, most of these people have no cultural relevance. There's no cultural relevance to the Poor Righteous Teachers. Anybody has ever heard of them. All right? They're not like one of the more popular rap groups that have ever existed. I think they probably had less than 5 albums, I'm sure. Okay? I don't think anybody outside of New York has ever listened to the Poor Righteous Teachers other than just a few people. But Public Enemy, of course, was huge. Public Enemy was massive for a time. But Public Enemy has not been relevant in over 20 years. I mean, I recently, and by recently, I mean probably 10 years ago, Chuck D was talking about how Public Enemy doesn't really tour in the United States because they can't draw an audience. Their audience is mostly overseas in Japan and such. Same could be said for KRS-One. KRS-One was huge. But how many people do you know have listened to a KRS-One album? Let alone listen to one recently. I've listened to KRS-One's entire discography. I literally have. But anything outside of like the Boogie Down production days is pretty shaky and questionable. Okay. But Public Enemy, the first few albums were very hard. Were very good. It's a little wishy-washy after that. Okay. And Wu-Tang, we already know. Wu-Tang is one of the greatest rap groups of all time. And then Wu-Tang Clan probably single-handedly pushed a lot of the Nation of Gods and Earths, Nation of Islam stuff into hip-hop. Probably single-handedly, most people were exposed to this stuff through the Wu-Tang Clan. They're the most, and they're still culturally relevant today. With documentaries and movies and such coming out about them, absolutely, it's still relevant today. So the Wu-Tang Clan absolutely is probably the reason why so many people are miseducated. Okay? But largely, this stuff wasn't coming from hip-hop. A lot of this stuff was coming from books that these guys were reading. They used to talk about this stuff on TV too, by the way. You know. So he says the political worldview of quote unquote conscious rap, which is a mix of Nation of Islam 5%er ideas, conspiracy theorists like William Cooper, and leftists like Howard Zinn and Michael Parenti, forms the backbone of hip hop, such that even non-political rappers, who are the majority, defer to it. That's a really good point. You know, that's a really good point. Explicitly political rappers have usually, though not always, had a rather limited audience. But among the audience are the rappers who are more popular and cross over into the mainstream. Thus, ideals trickle through. Ice Cube and Jay-Z are known primarily as gangster rappers, but both have associations with the Nation of Islam and the 5%ers, respectively, and have represented them in public. And they are hardly known. As RZA told Michael Knight Muhammad, in a lot of ways, hip-hop is the 5%. I think this is pretty good. I think he makes a pretty good argument here. I think he makes a really solid argument here. But I don't think Jay-Z is a really good representation of the Nation of Islam. I don't think Jay-Z has real ideas, nor do I think Jay-Z really has solid belief system. You know, Jay-Z seems to be a lot more of a chameleon to me. Ice Cube, yes. But Jay-Z seems to be more of a, you put water in the bucket, it becomes the bucket. You put water in a glass, it becomes the glass kind of gimmick. You know, I don't believe anything Jay-Z has going on. Now, he tries to get into why, he has a little aside here about why do white kids listen to gangster rap. And I do want to get into this a little bit. He says hip hop. No, wait. Matter of fact, he's quoting somebody named Peter van der Merwe, The Roots of Classical. It says the craze for the nigger minstrels of the 1840s had a pattern that was later to be repeated several times over. First, genuine Afro-American music is introduced to the white middle-class public as a shocking novelty. Then it is adapted to their tastes, principally by white musicians. Once this relatively bland commercial product has won acceptance, the public is ready for a new, darker influx, and the cycle begins again. I mean, yes, I see what you mean. You know, I see what you mean. The cycle of hip hop was mostly for black kids. Then you started seeing the crossovers with like Aerosmith. Then you had the Beastie Boys. Then you had some other sort of white groups that kind of made hip hop look cool. But that wasn't gangster rap though. You know, I can't think of any white gangster rappers. I just don't know about gangster rap fit in that cycle. So he starts talking about rap, okay? And all of this is about why white kids listen to gangster rap. He says rapping was built almost entirely around braggadocio and remains so now. There are plenty of those exceptions to this, particularly among the conscious and quote unquote conscious rappers, and also among those known as storytellers, who necessarily have to deal with a wider range of emotions in order to be effective in their craft. But a large portion of rap songs have been continue to be variations of I have the mic and you do not. I'm cooler than you. I like money and sex. I'm at the club. I have expensive things that you do not have. I will fucking kill you with my gun, bitch. I mean, he's pretty much got it all. Figured out right here. He says, no matter how cultured or smart you are, as a man, there is always a part of you that wants to thump your chest like a gorilla and declare your strength to the world. Some of that reason is why whites have historically liked black musical and cultural forms is for their perceived closer affinity to primal emotions like primal sexuality. This was a large component of mid-20th century phenomenon which Norman Mailer called the white Negro. White hipsters consciously identifying with and trying to emulate blacks because they were seen as more more connected to primal nature, less alienated from it than the dominant WASP culture. This white Negro hipsterism was a development of the quote cult of the primitive, which began a century before. Now, I do want to slow down a little bit because I can't tell you why white people listen to this stuff. I honestly do not. But my view of it has always been that white people have their own gangster movies. They've always made gangster movies. We know some of them, The Casino, The Godfather, Goodfellas, and they often have imitated those movies over time. They think that those characters are cool. They're devil may care. They make their own rules. They do whatever they want. They get whatever they want. You know, usually in the gangster movies, however, the villain typically gets his comeuppance. That's usually how those movies work. They always follow the same cycle. It's the rise and the fall. In hip hop, there's always a rise, there's never a fall. It's always about more money, more bitches, more coke, more hoes, more. There's never a downslide, right? But I think it's that the height of it is what makes white people interested in it too, because it's like listening to a black version of The Godfather, a black version of Casino through beats and lyrics, right? And then you have your nerds that are interested in actual music, how it's put together, the mixing, the mastering, the song structure, all that sort of stuff, which is always going to get certain people involved with it. But I think from a casual perspective, the lyrics have not mattered that much. And for those who listen to the lyrics, it's basically cinematic. It's not meant to be realistic. Despite the fact that hip hop claims to be realistic, it's not really realistic. It's mostly just cinematic. But here's where I think he actually goes into some interesting bit. He connects it with masculinity, which he starts talking about the movie Higher Learning. We're gonna skip past all of that stuff. But I'm looking for a specific passage that he wrote here. I didn't. Well, it's all right. It says violence as one of the most primal energies of existence is something that all men wonder about and either consciously address or unconsciously ignore. At some level, all men remember from our ancestral past, that as men we are called upon to deal with violence, either to defend ourselves and our loved ones against it or to inflict it on others for various reasons. Every meeting of men involves a sizing up of who could take who in a fight, who is the alpha, even through modern life seldom offers any situations in which this hierarchy becomes tested in this way. Consequently, men have an innate respect for other men who are proficient at violence. Even liberals who claim to abhor violence are often only one step away from fantasizing aloud about how much they would love to see their perceived enemies and inferiors killed and maimed, or even tortured and raped, always by someone else, of course. So this doesn't explain why women want like hip hop, but okay. I understand where he's coming from. He says, for the white hip hop fan, then, listening to rap music provides a vicarious experience of rough masculinity or just plain voyeurism into that world. But in addition to the feeling of I'm a tough guy who has sex with lots of girls and shoots anyone who messes with me, they also absorb the anti-white worldview, which informs the entire genre. And this is what happened on a mass scale for the last 40 years, especially the last 25 after rap went mainstream at the turn of the century. Now, listen here. He thinks that a lot of white liberals became anti-white or anti themselves, imbibe in self-hatred due to listening to hip hop. No, he must not have never heard of the. I know this guy. If this guy did such a deep dive onto hip hop music, which he doesn't seem to be a huge fan of, but knows enough about, trust me, he knows about the underground movements, right? Leftist politics always ends up in self-hatred. It always ends in self-hatred. In order to be a feminist, you have to hate yourself as a man. Okay? In order to be an ally of black people, you have to hate yourself as a white man. That's how they structure all of their ideologies. And these things have existed long before hip hop. The Weathermen used to engage in a lot of self-deprecating behaviors. They were allowing themselves to be robbed by the Black Panthers. They would be robbed by them. They wouldn't even call the police. They idolized them so much. They wanted to be like them so much. They didn't care if they were robbed them. They were punching them in the face and cussing them out in the street. They didn't care. This was before hip hop. And these people are the people who ended up being professors in the universities, going back to my previous point. These people had to be a third world woke idiot. You have to hate the United States, which means you hate yourself as an American citizen. You want to see America suffer so that fucking Palestine can be free or whatever. This is how they set up a lot of their movements. And it can't really be helped, because a lot of this stuff is based off of sympathy and building up sympathy for people that you view as inferiors or victims who are worthy of your pity. So he thinks that whites are learning their anti-white worldview from hip hop, but it's also on television. It's also in books from people who don't even listen to rap music. People like Tim Wise, for instance. When I picked up a Tim Wise book years ago, I didn't know Tim Wise was white. Tim Wise hates white people more than Farrakhan does. There's, and this is true of like Robin DiAngelo as well. They have nothing but utter distaste, specifically for poor whites. This doesn't come from hip hop. It's there for sure. They have learned to become numb to it, much like, women have become numb to it. Because, women get called bitches and hoes in all these rap songs, and they just don't pay that much attention to it. So when white people are being called devils, they don't pay that much attention to it. That's like women have decided that, when rap songs start calling about bitch, nigga, this and all this kind of stuff, you as a black man, you don't pay too much attention to it. He ain't talking about me, right? He ain't talking about me. So I ain't gonna. What's to get mad about? He ain't talking about me. Women think the same way. These bitches ain't nothing. Yada yada yada. Oh, he ain't talking about me. It's no big deal. So when he started talking about the white man is the devil, yada yada, he's like, he's not talking about me. A lot of people have learned to not take what's in the music personally. They become numb to that part. Whether they should or should not is up for debate. But I truly believe that a lot of people don't pay that close attention to it. I don't think white people are learning to be anti-white from listening to rap music. I think the anti-white worldview exists. It absolutely exists. I think hip hop has some of that, especially in some of the artists that were featured in the 90s and some of the artists that are featured today. And, obviously over the course of the entire run of hip hop. But I don't think it's meant to be taken seriously. Like when you see white people like The Alchemist, who's one of the most beloved white people in the hip hop space. It's a producer. Everybody loves Alchemist. I'm pretty sure Alchemist has heard people say all kinds of crazy shit about white folks on records. He probably was sitting right there in the booth when people was talking crazy shit about white people. He didn't take it personally because he knows that this guy's working with me. He doesn't hate me. He doesn't think I'm the devil. Just like when you have, a girlfriend, Snoop Dogg been married for 40 years or something like that. He goes out here and talks about hoes all damn day. His wife didn't ever call him like, what hoes you talking about? You know what I'm saying? Like the idea that hip hop is entertainment, no different than a movie. I think Semmelweis is missing that. I think he's taking everything at face value, which you can, because he's not wrong in some of his critiques. The only issue I'm saying is a lot of people don't take that stuff that seriously. So here he says, even if rap dies in America, highly unlikely, and even the most white kids stop listening to it, possible but mostly unlikely, the question remains, what will happen to the hip hop scenes in other countries? And he starts talking about Hong Kong and the Chinese Communist Party kind of adopting hip hop culture. And they've been trying to ban it, but they can't. It's too powerful. And there's a couple of lines in here right at the end that I think is very interesting. He says, so what they have decided to do instead is encourage the creation of patriotic rap. He's talking about the Chinese, and promote that over more subversive material. He says, quote, try to imagine that in an alternate universe where America had a pro-white government, and in response to the growing popularity of rap music, they hired and promoted Mr. Bond. Now, Mr. Bond is a white rapper. I clicked this video. It's a hyperlink in here. And it's a white rapper. It's a white supremacist rapper. Basically, he's very anti-Jewish. And he's modeled his style of rap after Eminem. But it's basically the white theory of America. They built this country, then the Jews took it away. Everybody hates white people. It's like I don't buy the whole white victim narrative to say that there aren't people who think that white folks are evil. To say that those people don't exist is just to lie. And I'm not going to sit here and fucking lie. But I'm not going to sit here and pretend that the white people are being heavily victimized either. So it was an interesting article, I think. And I didn't read the whole thing. It's actually pretty damn lengthy. If you actually want to read the whole thing, I put it in the Discord. Now he wrote a second piece called Nihilism in Black and White. Violence and suicide in punk rock and gangster rap, or Mobb Deep versus Peter Loeffner. This was the previous one was April 27th. This one's from April 28th. I like this. I like this one too, because this one talks about the difference between nihilism in black people and nihilism in white people. And I'm not going to read a lot of this one. I just want to read sort of the main ideas. So He says, in gangster rap and the culture it showcases, nihilism, that means the idea that nothing matters in the world, manifests in an extroverted, active way. A man, or more often just a boy, reaches the conclusion that life as he experienced it has no meaning or purpose, or that it is cold and cruel. That, as Ice Cube said in the first NWA record, life ain't nothing but bitches and money. After that, his attitude can be summed up in lines which become iconic in hip hop. I don't give a fuck. Fuck the world. That's a really good. And then he's just got tons of quotations from like Tupac and Ice Cube and the Wu-Tang Clan. Basically, Nas even going so far as saying, I don't give a fuck, fuck the world, blah 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 blah. You do hear that a lot in hip hop. You do hear that quite a bit. And he basically ties that into Mobb Deep. That Mobb Deep expressed this sort of gangster rap nihilism over and over again. And he says, despite the prevalence in hip hop of Afrocentrism and the ideas of the Nation of Islam and the Five Percenters, African Americans are just as trapped in a Christian paradigm as European Americans. The Nation of Islam is quite cognizant of this and teaches that Christianity is a slave religion used to keep black people weak and passive, an idea which echoes Nietzsche. He says, however, at the time, Minister Farrakhan is more likely to quote from the Christian Bible than from the Quran, and his fiery preaching style is entirely derived from the tradition of Southern Baptists, Black Southern Baptists. In listening to different hip-hop artists who rap about various spiritualities, KRS-One, Killah Priest, RZA, Jeru the Damaja, it becomes apparent that Black Americans are searching for answers in the same postmodern spiritual void inhabited by whites. They know that they are disconnected from their ancestral traditions, and some try to actively re-embrace them, to reconnect them. He says, it gives an example, and I think one of somebody in the comment section just mentioned this group. Yeah, Mark Forrester. He says the over-the-top Afrocentric theater of the early rap group X-Clan, but something is missing because you can't go back. I love this passage. This passage is really strong. It's really strong because you see a lot of rappers struggling with their religion. Even people who have strong religious convictions still struggle. DMX was one of those people. Bone Thugs and Harmony. They still have that sort of shakiness where faith is tested constantly. Life has been tough. Life has been hard. What's the point of all of this? It make you want to hate the world around you. He starts quoting Mobb Deep, which is amazing that he has such recollection of and he compares Mobb Deep's, what is this, Shook Ones, to Welcome to the Jungle by Guns N' Roses, which I never really thought about it that way until I read this. But if you listen to Guns N' Roses, Welcome to the Jungle, it's a dark record. He says, whereas the extreme of Black nihilism generally manifests as violence and criminality, the extreme of white nihilism manifests as self-loathing and suicide. He says it could be argued what I described above in gangster rap culture isn't really nihilism at all, but egoism, the primal assertion of the self and its rights against impossible circumstances. I think it is nihilism, my friend. I think he was right the first time. He said, is there something in the white psyche or soul that finds implicit value in the world even when one's own life seems worthless? Environmentalism as such is almost entirely a white creation. Yes, there are various non-white cultures that have an implicit value of nature and ways of living more harmoniously with it, but these are largely unconscious. The proof of which is the culture's willingness to adopt modern polluting lifestyles wholeheartedly when given a chance. Perhaps it is precisely because whites are the inventors of industrialization and hence mass pollution that ecology has become conscious in them rather than in other people. Thus, it is not just environmental consciousness, but environmental bad consciousness. Feelings of personal and collective guilt need to be assuaged one way or the other. And guess what? This sort of self-loathing that he's talking about, a lot of that comes from the left-wing worldview. Because rightoids, they don't really value the world. They value their families, right? They look at God and their family, and they try to prioritize that over the world. And Christians don't value the world because they look at the world as being fallen and sinful. So they don't value the world. The only people who value the world are leftists, socialists, globalists. Those people value the world. That doesn't mean we should be polluting and all that kind of stuff. But the self-loathing that you see in what's that sect of people who basically Gaianism, people who basically worship the earth. There's too many people on the planet. We're overpopulated. We need to start aborting a bunch of kids and stop having babies, particularly in white countries and Western countries. Stop having babies. Oh no, all you Africans and Arabs need to reproduce like rabbits, but all you whites and blacks in Britain and the United States and Canada, stop having kids. Streams and streams of Arabs and Mexicans all over the world into your country, but you stop having kids. That stuff comes from leftoids, a certain political movement that, again, as I mentioned earlier, means if you are pro the world, quote unquote, you're usually anti-human. Even Christians sometimes can be a bit anti-human. But he's right. Again, a lot of white people, when they have this sort of fuck the world, it's also connected to slitting your wrists and sitting in a bathtub. And that's why people say like we couldn't really jive with Eminem, because Eminem had a little bit of that, really strange, almost alien stuff to him that black people was like, I don't know if I like that. Even when it was regular fuck the world middle finger Eminem, it was always kind of weird to us, especially as it was happening in real time. He was very weird. He was very weirded out. But I never listened to like punk rock or anything like that, so I can't tell you how prevalent suicide is. But I see what he's saying again. I actually agree with a lot of his arguments. And is that the end? Yeah, that's pretty much the end of this one too. So I think these were really good articles. Not everything was correct, of course, but then again, he's basically just a guy thinking through some ideas. I remember when I first started reading it, and when I was first came across it, I thought, okay, this is going to be some kind of white nationalist. We're going to talk about, using the N-word a lot, calling black people monkeys and all that kind of stuff. But there was none of that. It seemed like he really is searching to understand why, it's this way. And it's basically just an observation. And the first article, which is, of course, probably the most controversial of the two, that hip hop is being used as a vehicle of anti-white messaging, I truly believe that it does happen because the same ideas that permeate through the academia permeate through television and permeate through the radio. It's the same kind of divisive shit. The same shit that pushed TLC's No Scrubs and pissed off entire generations of black males to the fact that somebody did a response track. That's how pissed off they were to it. Was it No Pigeons? I don't see anything wrong with it. I don't get a sense that he hates black people. He might be pro-white, but being pro-white doesn't mean that you're anti-black. I mean, there's nothing wrong with caring chiefly about who you are and your people. I'm not gonna be angry about that. But I didn't get a sense that this guy was like some kind of flaming racist, you know? And I think that his articles were interesting. We talk a lot about hip hop being anti-black because a lot of the victims of these crimes end up being black. We talk a lot about, you know, gangbanger culture and materialism being spread through hip hop music. And we talk about, you know, vice lords on rap, Bloods and Crips rapping, and how that influences kids and how that influences how people think about each other in Black America. All he is saying is think about how it affects white people too. To have an entire musical genre where it's perfectly okay to call white people devils and call, you know, say that white people are oppressive all over the world and all this kind of stuff, when there is no musical genre in which white people can say the same. I don't think there's anything wrong with that critique. So there's that. I don't really have a problem with it. I like these articles. I think he's done a good job. So somebody asked me, I believe in a different comment, to talk about the Jerobi White and his conversation with some YouTuber. And this YouTuber and Jerobi White was talking about Michael Rappaport. Now I'm just going to play this audio because I listened to parts of it and I left a comment. I'm pretty sure they deleted it because I heard they were deleting comments. This is a 10-minute clip. I'm not even going to play all of it. I'm just going to play the parts where they kind of go after Michael Rappaport. And this is where a lot of what Summit Wise is talking about, except for now, is Jews, right?
There is one thing with just how my mind works at this point that I connected a few different things. Mm-hmm. So from the documentary, even though there was the disagreements between Q-Tip and Fife, there was the story of how Fife was declining in health, but he had to pay medical bills. And so when he called y'all up, Q-Tip was like, no problem. Absolutely. Let's go on tour. What this speaks to, if this is accurate, which it seems it is the lack of healthcare in this country. The fact that you have someone whose health is declining, and in order for them to survive while their health is going down and declining immensely, they have to go on tour and perform and make sure that they're okay when deep down they're not. And
I mean, that's everybody, bro. That's everybody. People get sick, man. What's the issue? He was well enough to travel. He wasn't on his deathbed. Look, I saw the documentary. I believe I talked about the documentary on the channel, but get real.
Is that the only word I can think of? For us to have a structure so we don't have to do things like that.
Right.
People shouldn't have to work to get health care. So who's going to provide the health care?
The money you're getting doing being a musician and stuff like that is not what people think. They have it so wrong. You know what I mean? So, yeah. In order to do that, we did that. And also that goes to show that even though they were arguing,
you put it in quotation,
we're still brothers and we still love and we still take care of each other, regardless.
You put arguing in quotes. There have been disagreements on how the group was portrayed. Q-Tip put out a message about how y'all were portrayed. When it did come out, what was the group's reaction?
We were pissed. That's why we had so much drama around the releasing of that movie and all that stuff. Because Michael Rappaport made that movie for himself. Okay? Tribe fans don't want to hear that bullshit. They want to hear how we looped up this. What record did we use for that? Like, they want to hear that. We're nerds. We want to hear more about the process. Tip only chopped up one beat in the movie.
That's right.
Like one in the movie. Tribe fans don't want that shit. They want to hear how we did this shit, the processes and stuff.
So you
pause. Let me pause it right here. Nobody wants to watch 90 minutes of Q-Tip chopping up beats. I'm sorry. Okay. What people wanted to know is what the fuck happened to the Tribe Called Quest? What happened? Why you stop making music? Why is Fife not rapping when he's very good at it? Why is Q-Tip a multimillionaire? He can go on tour whenever he wants to, and Fife doesn't want to be involved. I think Michael Rappaport's movie answered that question. Now, you might not want people to see things that way, but apparently it had been going on for a while because the beginning of the movie means you have to bring the group back together. Why did the group break up? I think their last album was 1996. What happened? Oh, we're brothers. We're just going to stop making music, though. Come on. There's a reason why these people don't want to be in the same room with each other. People want to know why Tribe Called Quest fell out. You might not want people to know why, but the internal strife is just as important as the music. I put that in the comment section, by the way, so I wouldn't forget it. Whenever you see these documentaries that come out later on about these groups, they don't just talk about the good times. They also talk about the bad times, the internal struggles of these groups. The Wu-Tang Clan documentary was like a 10-part documentary, 3 or 4 episodes dedicated to these dudes arguing with each other about money. That's keeping it 100. That's keeping it real. Why Ghostface not on this album? Why Ghostface not doing something with this guy? Why aren't these guys talking to each other? Why are they putting out albums where RZA isn't doing any of the production? There's stories behind that. And fans are interested in those stories. Why would you think they wouldn't be? You don't want the dirty laundry aired, and that's fine. I respect that. But then don't agree to do the documentary. You agreed to do the documentary, and part of it, he named it Beats Riding the Life, named after one of their albums. Again, beats, the production, the rhymes, put together the words and all that. Life, the lives of Tribe Called Quest. Why these guys needed to be brought back together in the first place? Why did there need to be a reunion? Why was there a breakup?
think he is an opportunist?
I think that Michael Rappaport is a huge hip hop fan. He was one of the 3 or 4 white dudes that was at the parties back in the days. So that led to us using him because he was there. There are other people who want to.
Okay, so they're talking about. I'm not going to play this whole thing because it's going to get into talk about Zionism and the Jews and all that. I'm not getting into that. Jerobe White is like, oh no, Michael Rappaport, you know, he was at the parties and then he wasn't really down with the crew because he supports Israel and all that. Like, come on, nobody cares about any of that shit. Your criticism of him is unfair because you expected him to sit there with a camera and ignore all of this interesting information. These guys are arguing on tour. And you expect him to ignore that to show him. Then why did he even need Fife then if he just want to see Q-Tip chop up beats? He can just follow Q-Tip around as he does his production for whatever albums he's working on. He didn't need to see you or anybody else then at that point. People wanted to know the story of A Tribe Called Quest. It was about telling the story of these guys. And that includes their arguments. It always includes, what is a story without conflict anyway? For God's sake.
Direct a movie. But I was like, maybe
now he's saying that basically we didn't want the guy to do it anyway. Huh.
We gave Rappaport the edge because he was there. In the middle of the making of the movie, they started having an argument and fight or whatever. And he threw whatever script the fuck he had, plan he had before, and focused on that. Because that was the time when the tabloid TV and all that stupid shit was on TV. The sex and drama sells. So that was he got caught up in that.
But really,
wait a second. If he's following you around on tour, he's supposed to ignore the arguments? He said, oh, the argument only lasted a week. Who has week-long arguments? Who has week-long beefs? We were only mad at each other a week. Oh, is that why we had to pull fire from parts unknown to do this goddamn thing? Is that why we had to make phone calls to bring everybody together because it was one big happy family? Did he make that part up? Did he fake that? No, he didn't fake any of that stuff. Come on, man. It'd have been one thing if it was manipulated. If he was to say, yeah, man, he tried to make it seem like we weren't friends and all that stuff, and we were. Everybody recognizes that you argue with your brother, which he's about to get into. Oh, they're brothers. We have hardcore arguments with my brothers. We know that. That does not mean that does not put Fife in the same studio with Q-Tip in 1999 or anything like that. Why is Fife not on any of Q-Tip's solo material? Explain that. Somebody that's like his brother is purposefully cut out of his solo material? Why? No reason. Everybody's still friends. No. Bullshit. Okay? Bullshit. All right. So you got my thoughts on them attacking Michael Rappaport. Look, I don't care about Michael Rappaport. It's not about him. It's mostly about the unfair attack on him because he's a Jew that supports Israel, and this is a Jew that doesn't support Israel, so he's about to go. I'm not going into that. But his arguments, Jerobe White's arguments, make no sense. Everybody wants to know the in and outs of A Tribe Called Quest. You want to know why the group broke up. You want to know why they stopped doing music together. And now we got our answer, because Fife and Q-Tip didn't get along. And there was reason why they didn't get along. Why not just say, okay, it was real? Okay. Wait a minute. Now, should I play Michael Rappaport's? He did a interview with Talib Kweli. Now, I didn't hear this, so I haven't vetted it. So I'm just going to play it because I think it's unfair to have people criticizing him. He can't speak for himself. So let's.
Made you want to direct this Tropical Quest documentary. And for all intents and purposes, there was some drama surrounding that documentary when it first came out. But for my money, I, as a fan of you and a fan of Tropical Quest, I liked the documentary.
I did too.
I thought it told a necessary story.
Yep.
The initial trailer for the documentary was online, and it was called Beats, Rhymes, and Fights. And when you came to, we talked about it. I was hanging out around you. There's a story that Q-Tip didn't like the first cut or the first way that the documentary.
I don't like Talib Kweli, by the way. I used to be a fan of his music, but he's a full-on socialist dork. But I just want to get to Michael Rappaport. I'm not going to skip through it, but I think he's about to talk anyway. I just wanted to give my thoughts on Talib Kweli. I do believe that his first couple albums are pretty good, though. The albums with High Tech are pretty good. What's the name of the album? Eardrum is pretty good too. So if you're trying to figure out like, oh, Talib Kweli, should you listen to him? If you're interested in conscious rap and it's somewhat offbeat, yeah, Talib Kweli is great. I listened to him a lot when I was younger. I would listen to some of his stuff today, but I'm not listening to anything recent. Only the stuff that I was already listening to.
Was coming out. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, there was the first trailer was a trailer that got, this is a true story, that got taken from the editing house and posted online.
Okay.
So it was just like
an idea.
It was an idea, and the Beats, Rhymes, and Fights was just something that like it was just like a play on Beats, Rhymes, and Life.
Right.
And that came out, but yeah, I mean there was things that all the guys and
rest in peace to Fife
to Fife, yeah, and I mean there were certain things that everybody didn't like at one point, and that was one of the challenges of the documentary. In any documentary, and when you're telling a story of 4 guys, including Jerobi, that spans 20 plus years, that they're a group that has some dysfunction. And that the guys had, their things that they didn't agree on amongst themselves. When you tell certain things, and people being very candid, and it wasn't just tribe guys, it was guys from in the native tongue collective, that were sort of sharing things that would make other people uncomfortable. Understandably, there's certain things that didn't that Q-Tip didn't like, and we butted heads on it, and eventually we came to a happy medium, and I think that we put out the stuff that needed to be in the movie. My intention was never to make anybody feel uncomfortable. Like I had a love affair with A Tribe Called Quest, and I wanted to make the movie out of love, and I didn't know that there was any strife between the group. I didn't know
when you went into it. You didn't.
I thought it was going to be like this homage, just how did you make this song? How did you make that song? And then the story got deeper, and then of course Fife, with dealing with his health stuff, it gave, it became this more realistic, accessible human story. So, I eventually, we came to the medium, and I'm so glad that we were able to do it. And at the end of the day, the guys were all happy with the film, and I was happy with the film. And, me and Q-Tip are still friends.
That means that Q-Tip probably edited some of the worst stuff out. He probably overruled some of the parts that really made him look bad. Like, it looked bad enough, man. Take some of this shit out. That's the thing about doing documentaries or writing biographies of living people. They get some kind of editorial control. I think enough was enough. I'm glad that Fife got to speak what his problems were, and we got to see it. Unprodded. Like, it wasn't one of those things where somebody was in his ear, yada yada yada. These were his problems with Q-Tip from way back in the Gap that he brought back out and just said, it's always been this way. It's been this way since yada, yada. That's why I stopped fucking with him. Oh, okay. Now we get it. We hope you guys can overcome it. And eventually they did because they ended up doing another album. But come on, man. Oh, let's see what else he got to say, though.
And, I was just glad, with the passing of Fife, that I was able to tell the story because they deserve to have a documentary made about him at the highest end. And that's all my intentions were. So they're it's not the first time that the director and the subject, butted heads on it.
Right.
And it could be the last time.
You make documentaries about stuff that you love as a director. You made a 30 for 30 for ESPN, right? You want to tell us about that a little bit?
30 for 30 on the Knicks on the 77.
Oh, pause. No, you're not fucking with that. But yeah, I think he did a good job. It was a great movie. I loved it. Thought it was fantastic. It answered a lot of questions. I didn't see a problem. If you'd have did in a documentary on NWA in 1999, it probably would have been the exact same thing. Except for by that time, Eazy-E is dead. They aired all their grievances out on wax anyway. Groups break up primarily over money and power. Money and power. Those things break up. This is why you can't be a collectivist. To tie this back into politics a little bit, for those of you who kind of like that kind of thing. Collectivism always crumbles under money and power. Who's going to have the money? Who's going to have the power? Who's going to have the control? Who's going to write the rules? Everything about the structure of government is about who gets power and who doesn't. Who gets control of the money and who doesn't. It's the same thing in rap groups and rock groups and everything else. Ghostface and Raekwon stopped fucking with the Wu-Tang because RZA and his brother controlled the money and the power. They don't want nothing to do with that. Busy Bone stopped fucking with Bone Thugs and Harmony because Tamika Wright controlled the money and the power. Stop fucking with them. Doesn't mean that they hate them and they want them to die. But that's the story of the group. Whenever people ask Bone what happened, why Busy Bone disappeared, he'll tell you the same goddamn thing. Money and Tamika. It's been the same thing for 20 years. When people start doing documentaries and sitting down doing interviews with Raekwon, first thing he gonna do is talk about money. Second thing he gonna start talking about how you don't fuck with RZA. The guy who is seen as the architect is always going to be the guy who causes the biggest strife. It's that simple. In Bone, it was Crazy Bone. They had a problem with him doing all the hooks. Yeah, there was a bunch of other stuff too, but that was Q-Tip was the creative director, I guess you could say, of Tribe Called Quest. He was the guy that brought everybody together. He was seen as the talent, which is why he continued to have a career even after Fife left and everybody else left. RZA was seen as the talent. He could go and produce for anybody. The rest of these guys, but the Wu-Tang thing was a little bit deeper demon than I thought, considering Wu-Tang is wholly owned pretty much by RZA, and everybody else is just an independent contractor signed with RZA, which is psychotic. And I didn't even think about things that way until it was broken down in that way in the documentary. It's like, man, some people just don't want their dirty laundry, put out there for the world to see, and I respect that. I get it. But Jerobi is full of shit, and Q-Tip is full of shit. So there's no more to it than this. But thank you guys for stopping by, man. I appreciate it. You guys have a great weekend. I'll talk to you guys later.